Hey everybody, welcome back to the History Freak, and thank you so much for joining me on this video when we're going to be talking about Christa Mcauliffe. So people who follow this channel will know that I usually talk about medieval English history. So to make a video about something that happened back in America and in the 80s is something quite different for me. Don't worry, I'm not abandoning the medieval world, I have plenty of videos planned. But I am interested in other things too, and I wanted to mix things up a bit on the channel and tell some different stories. And Christa's is one that I find myself coming back to over the years. Before we start, if you haven't done so already, why not subscribe, and you won't miss any of the fabulous history videos we have planned. But for now, let's crack on and learn about Christa. So I want to start by talking a bit about my journey with Christa's story. I was actually born in the 80s, so the Challenger disaster happened in my lifetime, but I will say I don't have any memories at all of when it happened. I would have been very young, so this isn't unreasonable. But I do remember at some point when I was a bit older, my parents telling me a story of a teacher who got the opportunity to go into space, but who sadly died in the attempt. The story always stayed with me. But it wasn't until many years later, when I was on holiday in Florida, that I visited the NASA Kennedy Space Center, and I really started to take a bigger interest in the story. When I visited, I was really impressed with how they celebrate their wonderful achievements at NASA, but also how they respectfully acknowledge those things that went wrong, including, of course, the story of the Challenger, which of course was the mission Christa was picked for. In this video, we are focusing on Christa's story, but we must acknowledge that she was one of 7 people who died that day, and the loss of all 7 lives was a tragedy. The rest of the crew were Gregory Jarvis, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Judith Resnick, Francis Dick Scobie, and Mike Smith. This was a very experienced and talented crew. Many had come through the astronaut program, which was an attempt by NASA to find talented people to come and work with them. They wanted a diverse group of people to make NASA more relatable to the general public. Christa was born in Boston in September 1948. Oldest of her siblings, it seemed she had a very happy childhood, and she was a great big sister. She did a lot of activities as a child, and supposedly she even expressed a desire to go into space from a young age. In her early 20s she was married, and in time the couple would have 2 children. From what I have seen, they looked like a very happy, loving family. Obviously Christa was a teacher, and she taught social studies in a New Hampshire high school. NASA of course was a big deal in the news. I mean, what they did was incredible, and they needed to stay in the public eye. It was important to find ways to keep people's interest, and the idea of sending a civilian into space got hold, and many thought a celebrity would be a good choice. Big Bird from Sesame Street was considered as a way of making children excited by NASA. It was ultimately decided the first civilian in space would be a teacher, and the Teacher in Space program was announced. It was a great way to recognise the hard work of teachers, and I love the fact that the opportunity was not given to a privileged celebrity, but to a normal, hard-working citizen. Over 11,000 people applied. It was a long application. From the 11,000, over 100 were shortlisted from across the country. Briefings about space travel, as well as fitness tests and interviews followed, and just 10 finalists were chosen to continue. Now, of course, I was not part of the selection process, and I have no idea how strong the competition was. I'm sure it was amazing and very competitive. But I feel from watching videos that I can totally understand why Christa was picked. She seems like one of those people who everyone would totally gravitate towards. Great enthusiastic energy, who loved where she was in life. She was really charismatic and a confident public speaker, and was committed to her work. It's really refreshing that now, in a world where everyone and their mother wants to be famous, that she was not seemingly in it for the fame, but to really help teach her students, as well as fellow teachers, about space, but also about reaching for their dreams. I mean, what better lesson could a teacher teach than that? What was so wonderful about this was what Christa represented. Amazing things could happen to normal people. And for people who dreamed of going into space, the reality of it must seem so much closer with what Christa was doing. One of the things about making a video of somebody who lived so recently is because of technology, we can hear her voice and see her face. As somebody who usually does videos about people who lived hundreds of years ago, this does feel very different. With these people, I can only see a portrait and imagine how they would have walked and talked. But the fact that with technology we can see Christa and the whole crew and get a sense of who they were, their pride and excitement, makes this very real. There are some great videos for you to watch about the Challenger and Christa, but if you'd watched just one video, I would recommend people watch is when she is announced as the winner of the Teacher in Space program. On request of the finalists, all 10 knew the result before the filming, and knowing that really adds something when watching Christa in the moment. She's so proud and excited, and there's a really touching moment when she and George Bush grab each other's hands. Her family must have been so happy for her. I've watched this video many times, and I'm not ashamed to say, I usually shed a few tears. After winning, she became famous nationally and was celebrated in her hometown. People were so excited to see a civilian and a woman be picked to go into space. As great as all this was, life would be very different for Christa. She had to leave the classroom and her family to go through the tough training. The Challenger was considered one of the best shuttles built at the time. Just looking at the pictures, you can see how impressive it was. Without doubt, this was an amazing achievement. Based on the technology of the time to successfully send people into space and bring them back, it's amazing. Challenger first went into space in 1983 and completed 9 successful flights before the disaster. The plan was that Christa would teach lessons from space. In these lessons, she was going to show her students what it was like on the shuttle, how they lived, what they ate, as well as teaching about science and doing demonstrations. The eventual launch happened in January 1986, but had originally been planned for about 6 months earlier. In January, due to multiple problems, the launch was delayed almost a week. Many people, family, friends, and other excited people came to watch the launch, and Christa's students watched live on TV, along with many other Americans and people around the world. Just 74 seconds after the Challenger left the ground, it exploded. Of course, this was shocking and distressing time for everyone watching, with some not exactly sure what was happening at first. Excitement turned to shock, as the reality of what was happening started to set in for all the people watching. Following the events of that tragic day, there was a big investigation. Now, I'm not in any way knowledgeable about space shuttles, and to be honest, I can barely drive a car, so I'm not going to try and deep dive the reason for the accident. From what I feel I've read, the unusually cold weather caused something called an O-ring to fail to seal properly, and as a result it leaked fuel. I'm going to leave it there before I embarrass myself with my lack of science knowledge. It's really unfortunate that some of the engineers at NASA believed there would be a problem and had tried to stop the launch. But the pressure of multiple launches from NASA versus the time it would take to fix the problem led to some very unfortunate decisions being made, which I'm sure everyone regrets massively. I know a lot of important lessons were learnt from this. Of course, NASA is a huge operation, and trying to stop a launch would have been a very difficult task. Supposedly, when building the shuttles, an escape option had been thought about, but was never in fact done due to a number of reasons. In the shuttle, there was no way for the crew to escape. This was such a tragic event, But something good that happened in time was Barbara Morgan, who was the runner-up of the Teacher in Space program and trained alongside Christa, would in fact go into space over 20 years later. I think this was a wonderful way to put a lid on the Teacher in Space program and to honour all the crew of the Challenger. Before we end, one thing I really enjoy in watching videos about Christa was she had some really great and inspiring quotes, and here are some of my favourites. Get as much out of life as possible. Another is, reach for it, push yourself as far as you can. And of course the one she's most well known for, I touch the future, I teach. I just absolutely love those words. I think Christa was such an inspiring person. Well, thank you so much for joining me on this video. I really hope you've enjoyed watching it as much as I've enjoyed researching it and making it. And if you've got an idea of someone from the past that you'd like to see me do a video on, then feel free to pop it in the comments. And make sure you join us again in the future for more great videos about people from the past.